Welcome to BizTech's Leadership Conversation Show. Our guest today is Sri Naidu. He's a Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia Pacific and Japan at Anomali. Anomali is the leader in intelligence-driven extended detection and response cybersecurity solutions. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Sri.
Hey, Brian, thanks for having me today on the show. I'm really excited knowing the BizTech platform and your reach. And hopefully we'll have a really good conversation today and share about what Anomaly is and really the threat cyber landscape and the threat intelligence space as well.
Okay, for a start, tell us a little bit more of the company, its history, and its presence in the region.
Yeah, so Anomaly is not a young company. It's always been focused on threat intelligence, and then we've sort of understood our value proposition into the XDR space as well. And our presence has grown strength to strength, not just within Asia Pacific and Japan, but really growing across from a global perspective and really helping top-notch large enterprise organizations protect them. We protect them from all the way from Singapore down to Vietnam, down to Australia, down to Thailand. It's amazingly utilized because of its use cases and what we deliver to a customer. And I'm sure we'll get into that as the conversation gets along. But also it's neat because, the evolution has been so fast and hard for cybersecurity. It's not an evolution like word processing where we can take a second year to sort of update our next document management tool. But cybersecurity evolves every day, every second, every new threat that comes out. So we've had to keep at the forefront, and Anomaly does that in a pretty wonderful way.
Now, I want to zoom in then on the cybersecurity landscape in the Asia Pacific region. Now, that's changed dramatically in the last 2 years. There's been increased threats from all sides and all aspects, and it's been really challenging for companies in this part of the world. Could you shed some insights on how this risk landscape has changed in the last 2 years?
I mean, Brian, it's a crazy question. I sort of pinch myself all the time, not just 2 years, 25 years ago, I defied all expectations of what I should focus on post my undergrad and chose a career in cybersecurity. And at that point, we all as individuals looked at antivirus, anti-spam, and if you're old enough like me, you'd go, wow, if I had that on my laptop, I'm protected. And then brings me to your question, is 22 years later, in the last 2 years, as we have all hunkered down at home due to the pandemic, as we have had to, first move our lives to a more mobile life and rely on the connectivity that's provided, whether it's at home or when we're at a coffee shop and logging onto the local Wi-Fi. We've had to deal with different ways of working and producing the same type of productivity, but then compromising security. I always tell people, imagine if your house was now mobile, it's moving around, and you're no longer in one physical location. Imagine the difficulty in protecting that. Imagine in understanding that now you've moved from a specific place in Indonesia down to another space, and you have to plug your home there for a couple of hours. Do you know the termites that are there, the pests that are there, the folks that are living around you that could be threats? You don't know anything. So in the last 2 years, that's happened to us. We've all had to suddenly work at home, use our laptop, suddenly set up lights, camera, and action, be on Zoom calls, and then try to be as productive as we were. And we've underestimated the need for security. And that's why security firms over these 2 years have been sort of appreciated a lot more because, one, we're no longer physically within our office confines of a LAN environment where we're all plugged in through one server and one firewall. And it's like a home, right? Previously, we had the gate. We knew where the gates were. We could protect ourselves within the house, and we knew where each room was. We knew where the money was and where mom and dad lived and where our children lived. But now everything's mobile. We don't know where everyone is, yet we need them all to be secure. And so the last 2 years have created such amount of chaos for us that it's also, changed the whole landscape. We've now looked at security on how do we promote this need for being mobile? How do we promote this need for the higher extent of folks having time on their hands to, do what they want to do on the bad side of the world? Because previously, when we looked at a hacker, they had, egoistical needs, financial needs, but now they've got folks that are just sitting there looking at targets all the time. So with those, there's a multitude of new activities that are going on in the region, going on just in certain countries, that we've all had to rapidly evolve ourselves to do this. And, one of the things about running a region like APJ and meeting large customers is then you realize that as a territory, as a region, as a group of countries within this part of the world, there's very little regulation that aids us. We're very fortunate to have very forward-thinking leaders in countries, leaders in companies that enforce these regulations, enforce this, I would say, cadence to ensure security for their organizations. And I think that's sort of been great. And I think that's accelerated a lot of companies' investment in cybersecurity during these last 2 years. And hopefully this really answers your question, but the targets that we have in Asia and Pacific and Japan and around this region, they keep growing because these companies haven't sort of slowed down during the pandemic. They've tried to keep investing and keep growing as well, amidst the heightened alerts that we've got from all these cybersecurity threats around us.
Now, Sri, you really highlighted an interesting thing that not many people are aware of. So the traditional view of cyber criminals, the bad actors, is individual actors or maybe actors that are collaborating among small groups of people. What you've alluded to, which is a key trend, is really bad actors getting together in an organized and structured manner and using this as a business model to make money. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because this is something that most CIOs and C-suites don't actually understand. The threat has evolved dramatically.
Yeah, so it's very interesting, right? Like I said, 25 years ago, we didn't have all these, and then it's evolved, and we assume that the bad actors act individually because our assumption is a criminal acts in an individual, and then we evolved to having gangs, right, and triads and things like that. So they sort of got into a group and had strength in numbers and were able to act more and in terms of what they could deliver and how much financial profits they could gain for their organization. And unfortunately, when not educated right, individuals might think this is a very sexy option for a career path. But they don't realize that it's actually a criminal way of life, right? Because you are not the good guy. You are the bad actor. You are the criminal in that show. And there is going to be a good cop. And companies like Anomali and companies like other cybersecurity organizations, we are the good guys. And fortunately for us, companies, like you said as well, what we would like to see more is organizations appreciate more that these are now gangs. They are no longer individuals. They're no longer just wanting $100 from you. They want $1 million from you. And that they are going to come in a group and they're not going to relent till they get through. And the only way is to be collaborative. And that's one of the things that, Anomaly advocates is really collaboration. And that how do we stop these guys? How do we share the information? How do we share these threat intelligence? And topics that are going to arise in the next, few months in Asia and all is creating more trusted circles where we can share these informations. As we've seen, now we get to see information about the latest malware threats, the latest groups that are going for a specific organization. The earlier and faster we allude to that, and the earlier and faster leaders of organizations recognize that it's no longer individuals, but a concerted effort of groups, it's easier for us. We've got to walk away from the fact that these are no longer organized groups. They are organized, they are bigger, better, and smarter, and they've got a clear goal of revenue for themselves. And we've got to address that.
Now, Sri, if I'm a CIO in the region, I've got multiple tools that I've been using over the past few years, but the reality is the following. The threats are evolving constantly, and not all vendors are created equal. And I've got a lot of complexity in my cybersecurity defensive mechanisms. Walk me through what are the challenges that arise from adopting these sort of varied solutions, and how can I make things easier for me?
Brian, great question, but a tough question, right? Just like not all cybersecurity companies are built equally, nor are CIOs and CISOs. Well, first, I think CISO, CIO, I alluded to it earlier, trusted circles, building complementary groups that you sort of learn from. I think you've got to learn what's best practices, what is happening in the industry, and the latest news. And often, one of the most important things to learn from is case studies within your group. I would say, whilst the bad actors are creating that groups, the good guys, we've got to come together and create those groups too. And what would I do as a CIO? Number one, I'll take stock. What worked 10 years ago isn't going to work today, right? Assuming that works is the biggest folly we can make. We're assuming a 10-year-old car runs as well as a brand new one. There are parts of it that will work and run. There are parts that need fixing, and there's parts that we will need to align with the new roads that we're going to, the new situations that we'll encounter while we're taking that journey. So what we could do is first take stock of the current old car that we have to evolve it if they don't have the full budget to make a full evolution to purchase a brand new car, because not everyone has that budget to immediately say, well, I'll put this, and it's a supermarket and I'll have everything. So we'll assume they're still using their old car, and then we'll take it down the road and make this journey with them. The most important thing I believe in a car is your dashboard, your brakes, and your tires, right? Brakes and tires, because they're in touch with the road the most, and safety. Yeah, well, you would say your safety belt too, but I'll assume that those are in function and working. And then, and then you've got your dashboard, because your dashboard gives you a view of your speed, right? Your heating in your car, the amount of fuel you have left to get there. So a dashboard of your car's ability to traverse this journey. So now I've got these in place, and then I'll go, okay, I've got to defend my car. I've got to make sure my hull and my chassis is stable, which is basically your network, your general endpoint users. You want to make sure all of them are secure within your confines of your car. Well, moving through this car, you want to have a dashboard that says, I am going to make the full journey. If there is any detours in this in this road trip, I will make it to my final destination because I've got 50 gallons of fuel still left in my car, right? And that makes a difference because you know how you're going to get there. So in the same way of looking at things, you want to have some kind of endpoint security, some kind of network security definitions. You want to have those already in place. And then depending on the type of organization you are, if you are really consumer facing or you're business facing, those mechanisms need to be secure so they are providing safety to the people engaging with you. And finally, you want to be able to take precautionary steps. And you know, while I can rationalize your question of saying, you know, what would they look at? I would say this is what I would do. I would look at just making sure I can look at the future and say there's a lot of new threats coming my way. I'm going to take precautionary steps, and you know, companies like Anomali take that step. And then I've got my passengers secure. I've got my hull, my brakes, my connectivity from the car to speak to people while I'm going. So those are things I would look at as a CIO. CIOs in general that don't go or subscribe to this school of thought take it in a very, or rather two categorized view. They go, oh, this is the buzzword of the day, which is firewall. So I'll spend my budget this year on firewall. This year, my budget is ransomware because everyone's got a ransomware, but that's not the right approach. And I think that's where we've made mistakes, and we could do better as a CIO and look at it as a long-term effort. And why a threat intelligence platform is kind of important to you is because you're trying to forecast the roadblocks ahead, right? Whether you have enough fuel to go through, whether there's a threat that's coming down your way on that highway down to your continuous journey.
And Sri, I want to interrupt you there because the threat on the highway now is something that CIOs probably need to look at further. Further down their supply chain, are the threats there that could damage or impact their businesses? Because in the past, that's not been an area that they've been looking at.
That's so true. I mean, I sit down, as you know, Brian, on a weekly basis. I sit down with a lot of CX executives, just sharing my thoughts, my vision, and they do want to hear it. But you'd be surprised the number of them that don't know those threats ahead of them, because we are so reactive as a culture, as human beings. It's got to hit someone first before we feel we've got to take an action against it. But the best organizations are the ones that are investing in some kind of threat intelligence to tell them that there are those roadblocks, that there is this malware coming, there is this attack coming, and how do I get that information? So I am taking precautionary actions. Far too often, especially in the last 3 years, what's sort of fueled the topic of cybersecurity, the topic of the need for cybersecurity has been people have been affected. It hasn't been, this company didn't get affected because they had this future roadmap, right? We should be congratulating these CIOs for not being in the papers. We should be congratulating brands that don't have a website that looks like theirs out there in the website, because those are things that Anomaly does. We look at brand monitoring, whether your company has got another website that's already become a scam site, and why are we not doing that? And unfortunately for us, it's not till we have conversations like this, Brian, with yourself, that I can share these things, because it's not a daily conversation over a dinner table. You don't talk to your friend and say, oh, I wish I had a tool that actually could tell me that there's another website like mine, functioning like mine, looks like mine, and taking data of my valued customers. But if we could tell people that there are these activities going on, all the things that we've seen in the last 2 years while we sat at home and saw the scams rise, the phishing attacks, if we could have just told that person a day before, if we could have just shared that with a CIO a day before, it would have made such a difference.
Now, I want to then zoom in on Anomalies then cyber resiliency survey, because obviously this is very much linked to what we've just been talking about. Could you share with us some of the key takeaways from this survey and key facts that perhaps stood out for you?
For me, the Anomali Cyber Resiliency Survey really gave me a wonderful insight into things that I was already assuming, but didn't really sort of get around to in fundamentally understanding. And what we didn't recognize was the important part for each organization, right? And I think that was key for me. And then it makes Anomaly's ability to assimilate with these organizations and connect and provide that one singular view much easier for these organizations. Because in the past, there was a lack of integration for this kind of ability to look at and understand the cyber attacks and the risks. And I think what this survey really enhanced and brought to a lot of people was this ability for us to integrate all this information from various sources and bring it together for folks. I think that was the number one benefit I could see, and it benefited so many people that we work with, and I advocated in such a strong way.
And so, Sri, then as a CIO, and I'm faced with a plethora of solutions that I can pick, is that Anomaly's secret sauce? Why should I pick you compared to someone else?
Well, I would again put on a general hat, right, and not just look at Anomaly as a brand and that. I would say, why would I pick a specific product, and does it fit in my organization? Does it fit in my needs? And does it fit in my budget, and whether they have support in the region, right? Where we're all based in this region. I think number one thing I'd look in any product is the support I'm going to receive. Do they have the right partners here? Can they hold my hand through the deployment process and then making sure I'm using the product the right way? I think that's number one I need to know. Next is, well, I've got a dollar and want to spend a dollar, and what's the most effective use of that dollar. And then the third part is, what are the products I need? Like I told you before, the $1, how do I split it up? And where Anomaly fits in this is this threat intelligence platforms and how this, like I've always told individuals, it provides you that magic ball, that crystal ball, that gives you the ability to preempt, detection and response. It's so important. And I do believe that is what Anomaly brings to organizations and why we are used by some of the largest organizations in the region. And it's the number one thing that when I sit with a CIO and goes, I love it, Sri, because I get to see everything now. It's not just a general report. It's providing my teams the ability to associate and both react accordingly and detect all the issues that could arise within my organization.
Sri, it's been a fascinating conversation on cybersecurity. Before we leave, any final words and golden nuggets of wisdom you want to share with the audience as a whole?
Brian, it keeps changing as well, just like the 2 years. But I would say, God, cybersecurity changes so fast. So, you've got to keep up to it. Spend your time, if you can, subscribing to feeds that keep you at the forefront of the news. Don't be a victim, but preempt them. That is what I would say. Preempting dangers is more important than trying to dig yourself out of a hole. And with that, Brian, thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation too, and your questions were great.
And thanks a lot for coming on the show, Sri. I enjoyed this tremendously. I'm Brian Fernandez, and we've been speaking to Sri Naidu. He's the Senior Vice President and General Manager, Asia Pacific and Japan at Anomali, on BizTech's Leadership Conversation Show. This video and podcast will be on our various social media platforms, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.